President Trump will welcome French President Emmanuel Macron to the White House today. The two leaders are expected to discuss the Iran nuclear agreement. Mr. Trump is considering having the U.S. pull out of that deal, while Macron is hoping to convince the president otherwise.
The deadline to renew the 2015 deal is next month, and it also coincides with President Trump's potential summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. CBS News chief White House correspondent Major Garrett has more on how Trump officials are also managing that possible meeting.
Have a message on North Korea, sir. Very good.
President Trump sounded hopeful after leaving from a week at Mar-a-Lago. That followed an overly optimistic tweet suggesting North Korea, quote, agreed to denuclearization. The North has done no such thing, but that is the White House goal. Pyongyang did agree to close its nuclear test site and suspend long-range ballistic missile tests as both sides negotiate a potential summit in May or June.
It's an easily reversible decision. They made no announcement about their medium or short-range ballistic missiles.
Republicans said they are skeptical North Korea is ready to abandon nuclear weapons.
This is a great public relations effort by Kim Jong-un.
Summit preparations coincide with a May deadline to renew the 2015 Iran nuclear deal that President Trump has threatened to abandon, a move that could allow Iran to restart its pursuit of nuclear weapons.
I do think he will move away from the agreement on May 12th.
If that happens, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said on Face the Nation that Iran is ready to resume its nuclear program.
If the benefits of the deal for Iran start to diminish, then there is no reason for Iran to remain in the deal.
French President Emmanuel Macron said the agreement, while flawed, has real security advantages.
But for nuclear, what do you have as a better option? I don't see it.
Macron, who is set to meet with the president this week, could sway Mr. Trump's Iran decision.
Both of us are probably the maverick of the systems.
All right, with more on what to expect from that visit, let's bring in Major Garrett at the White House. So, Major, how much influence does President Macron have on President Trump's decision when it comes to this Iran nuclear deal?
Well, we're going to find out. This is a concerted effort. French government, the German government, the United Kingdom all support maintaining the Iran nuclear deal, and that means keeping the United States inside of it and keeping the president aligned with it, even though, as Bob Corker, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said over the weekend, he believes the president's going to pull the United States out of it. So Macron is here, part of the state visit, to make that case. And later this week, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, will come here in the second stage of essentially a French-German tag team with the president to say, yes, the deal is flawed. We're working on side agreements that we can make that would make this deal tougher on Iran in terms of more aggressive, more regular, and more widespread inspections within the nation of Iran on its nuclear program. That might appease President Trump, get him to stay within the confines of the agreement. But this is an enormous part of the European conversation with the president. And the French president is the lead negotiator, if you will, in trying to keep the president inside the nuclear deal with Iran as opposed to pulling out of it, because the Europeans fear if the United States leaves it, this multilateral agreement will fall apart. And as much as Iran and as much as the French or the Germans or the Brits might want to keep it, Iran will walk away and start doing things to move it closer to possessing a nuclear weapon. And that's why it's so important in the context of North Korea. And it's one of the arguments the Europeans are making. Mr. President, you have an agreement that denies for some period of time, 10 or 15 years, Iran possessing a nuclear weapon. You're trying to deal with a country, North Korea, that already has them. If you could, wouldn't you like to have North Korea in the nuclear box you have Iran in now? That's one of their argument points. And the president is open to that, but resistant. And this conversation with the French president is going to be significant as to whether or not the president moves from his position of hostility to the Iran deal to one that's more open to staying within it.
So, Major, this trip for Emmanuel Macron is the White House's first official state visit. What does that entail? But also, do you know just what the nature of their friendship is like. We know that, you know, when the president has sort of face-to-face interaction with people, they have sort of greater influence. Things started off rocky with these two men, then rather warm when the president visited France, and then Macron made the suggestion that he was the one that influenced America to stay in the game in Syria, and the White House didn't like that. So just where do they stand right now?
Well, they're good friends, and they're working on building a stronger relationship. But one of the things the president believes about himself is that he can be a friend of a world leader, but also drive a very hard bargain. And one of the aspects of this conversation about the Iran nuclear deal is also going to be about trade. And will the European Union, or will the French or the Germans provide any other trade concessions? The president operates on lots of different levels, trying to negotiate things and hold one item out over here, pressing for something over there, and perhaps other arrangements can be made. All of that depends on a good working relationship and the tenacity of the two negotiators. The president believes he holds the upper hand. He knows the French, the Germans, the Brits want him to stay in the Iran deal. Okay, what can he get for that? That's essentially what the state visit is about. It will be a dinner, a private dinner tonight at Mount Vernon, which will be just between the two couples, and then a state visit, welcoming ceremony, all the pomp and circumstance here at the White House tomorrow. All of that is to suggest to the French that this administration is going overboard to welcome it and to offer its embrace. But these negotiations on trade on the Iran nuclear deal are front and center. And the comments from Emmanuel Macron about Syria, that he was the one who talked the president into staying longer than he wanted to, did fall flat. But there are bigger issues to deal with, and they're going to focus on those.
Major, let me ask you about North Korea. I want to play a little bit of sound from Sarah Huckabee Sanders when asked about what kind of concessions the U.S. would make for North Korea to denuclearize. Take a listen.
Again, I'm not going to get ahead of the conversations. The ultimate goal is denuclearization. They've already started making some steps that we feel are progress, but we certainly know we have a long way to go, and we're going to continue pushing forward.
Major, what does denuclearization mean to President Trump and the White House, and what does it mean to North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un?
We don't know the second part of that question, Vlad. We don't know what Kim Jong-un is prepared to do and how he would define denuclearization. Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked that question. She said, for the president, it means what it would mean to any normal person. No nuclear weapons and no ballistic missile technology. That essentially means full surrender. Full surrender for a country whose entire global identity, such as it is wrapped around the nuclear program. No one would pay attention to North Korea, a backward country with an authoritarian regime, embedded poverty, and almost no economic vitality, if it didn't have nuclear weapons and the means by which to menace neighboring countries and now possibly in the not too distant future the mainland of the United States of America. That's what makes North Korea relevant in any international conversation. And the Trump administration's position is no concessions, no relief of the sanctions until you completely promise to denuclearize and start going way down that road, which doesn't mean stopping testing. It doesn't mean closing facilities. It means dismantling facilities and giving up all fissile material, the material necessary to make nuclear weapons, and to take apart the ones you already have. Those are a massive number of steps, all of them wrapped around the North Korean identity and the identity of this regime, Kim Jong-un's regime. So that's the goal that the administration has set. How the North defines denuclearization or what it's prepared to do, we still are seeing that play out. The steps taken this weekend did not win great favor here at the White House or on Capitol Hill. So the North Koreans are going to have to play much more aggressively in terms of moving toward concessions if there's going to be A, a summit, or B, a resolution of this impasse with the Trump administration.
Major, before I let you go, real quick, with all of these things on the president's plate, the North Korea talks, the meeting, the state visit by the French president, the president spent much of the weekend tweeting an enormous amount of stuff, including attacking a reporter, essentially saying that she had no access when there are tons of pictures on the internet of the two of them together. What did you make of that? While the rest of the world was mourning for the former First Lady Barbara Bush. We saw that picture go viral of all the former presidents and their wives, and a very seemingly happy Melania Trump in that photo. The president, at the same time that funeral was happening, was tweeting all this other stuff. What did you make of that?
Well, the president's tweeting habits this weekend, just in pure volume, more tweets this weekend than any other weekend this calendar year. I know it's April, so that record may soon be broken. But you raise an important point. While the country was focused on other matters, and one might expect the president to be quietly preparing for the state visit and going through the analysis of how to deal with the Iran nuclear deal, how to deal with the French president, Angela Merkel later on in the week, and everything related to North Korea, he's tweeting about just about every subject imaginable, even throwing one out about, well, will Michael Cohen, his lawyer and self-described fixer, flip? And we asked Mark Short, the head of legislative affairs here at the White House, and Sarah Sanders, what do you mean flip? What flip about what? Does Michael Cohen know something? And is the president now suddenly fearful? Is the president on Twitter indirectly admitting he has something to be worried about, guilty or otherwise? And both of them are like, oh, no, the tweet speaks for itself. There's no issue there. Yet he raises these questions with his tweeting patterns that are not only not consistent with either the flow of the news, the sort of general atmosphere around the news, or things that are coming toward him, but they raise questions that even the White House, and this is not new, can't or won't answer about what he's really thinking or what he actually means. So that is now, whether we want to call it normal or not, and I'm not suggesting we do either, it's just an embedded part of the reality of covering this presidency.
So true. Major Garrett, thank you.
Sure.
Well, Southwest Airlines has canceled flights to inspect all plane engines after last week's deadly midair explosion. Of the 4,000 planned departures today, more than 100 have been canceled. 49 flights were canceled yesterday, but it's unclear just